The crystal towers of Eltar Prime crumbled like broken glass as waves of metal locusts swept across the planet's surface. Admiral Kethros stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his beautiful homeworld die. The crystalline structures that had taken centuries to grow were being torn apart in minutes by machines that looked like giant mechanical spiders with cutting tools for legs. All civilian transports, evacuate immediately. Kethros spoke into his communicator, his voice shaking. Behind him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, but everyone knew it was too late. The harvesters had found them. These weren't ordinary machines. They were smart, hungry, and they multiplied like a virus. Every piece of metal, every circuit, every building they consumed made them stronger and helped them build more of themselves. They had been sweeping across the galaxy for 3 years now, leaving nothing but empty, stripped planets in their wake. In the Federation Council chambers on the space station orbiting the dead world of Nexus Prime, the surviving leaders of dozens of alien species sat in stunned silence. Council leader Ythra, her crystal body flickering with stress patterns, looked around the room at the defeated faces of her allies. The proud Zephyrian bird people, the wise amphibian Aquarians, the noble plant-based Verdani, all of them had lost their homeworlds to the metal swarms. 47 worlds, she said quietly. 47 entire planets stripped clean. Our fleets are scattered. Our weapons barely scratch them. Our most advanced technology seems like toys compared to their adaptive systems. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she was thinking, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Finally, old Admiral Zolthek, of the aquatic species, raised one of his tentacles. There is one option we haven't considered. The humans, Ythra whispered. The word hung in the air like a curse. For decades, the advanced alien civilizations had looked down on Earth and its inhabitants. Humans were violent, primitive, warlike creatures who still fought each other over resources and territory. Their technology was centuries behind the Federation's standards. Their ships were clunky and ugly. Their methods were brutal and direct, where alien warfare was elegant and precise. But they were still alive. While the galaxy burned around them, Earth remained untouched in its distant corner of space. The transmission was sent through quantum channels, racing across light years to reach Luna Station. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was on night duty when the message arrived. As a communications officer, he had decoded hundreds of routine transmissions, but nothing like this. His hands shook as he read the translation. Billions dead, entire species wiped out, planets turned into lifeless metal graveyards. And at the bottom of the message, something that made his blood run cold. A desperate plea for help from civilizations that had once called humans barbaric savages. Jake ran through the station corridors, his boots echoing off the metal walls. Luna Station was humanity's first major off-world military installation, built into the rocky surface of Earth's moon. It housed the most advanced human technology and some of their best military minds. Admiral Mike Thompson was in his office, reviewing patrol reports from the outer solar system, when Jake burst through the door without knocking. At 62, Thompson was a veteran of the resource wars that had ended just 20 years earlier. He had seen humanity's worst conflicts, but nothing had prepared him for this. The holographic display showed system after system marked in red dead worlds. Empty space where thriving civilizations had once existed. The Federation's mighty fleets, ships that could destroy moons and travel faster than light, had been reduced to a handful of survivors running from an enemy. They couldn't defeat. Thompson studied the tactical data with the cold eye of a professional soldier. The harvesters fought like nothing he had ever seen. They didn't use strategy or tactics in any recognizable way. They simply swarmed, consumed, and multiplied. But there was something about their patterns that seemed familiar. Sir, Jake said, still breathing hard from his run, Earth Command is already mobilizing. They want every available ship ready for departure within 72 hours. Thompson leaned back in his chair, looking out through the reinforced windows at the Earth hanging in space like a blue marble. Somewhere down there, in bunkers and military bases around the world, humanity's war machine was awakening. Ships that had been designed for fighting other humans. Weapons that had been built for conflicts where both sides played by the same rules. "You know what the ironic thing is, Jake?" Thompson said quietly. "They called us primitive warmongers. Said we were too violent to join their civilized galaxy. Now they want us to save them with that same violence they despised." He stood up and walked to the display, touching one of the red markers that represented a dead world. 47 worlds, Jake. Billions of innocent people, and we're their last hope. Thompson activated the station-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor, every room, every duty station on Luna Base. "This is Admiral Thompson. In 72 hours, we're going to war. Not against other humans, not for territory or resources, but for the survival of every living thing in this galaxy. The aliens who once looked down on us are counting on human stubbornness, human courage, and human refusal to quit when things look impossible." He paused, looking at Jake's young face. The kid was scared, but determined. That was good. Fear kept you alive in combat. "God help us all," Thompson said quietly, "because we're about to show them what Deathworlders really fight like." The space around Jupiter had never seen anything like it. Hundreds of human warships hung in the darkness, their running lights creating a constellation of deadly stars. Captain Lisa Bennett stood on the bridge of her heavy cruiser, watching through the viewports as more ships dropped out of hyperspace every few minutes. They came from every human colony, every orbital shipyard, every hidden military base that Earth had built over the past 50 years. These weren't the pretty, smooth ships that the Federation used. Human vessels looked like exactly what they were, weapons built by people who had been fighting each other for thousands of years. The hulls were thick with armor plating. Gun turrets stuck out at odd angles. Missile pods hung from the sides like metal fruit. Every surface bristled with defensive systems, point defense guns, and backup weapons. Bennett had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 15 years, but she had never seen Earth's military fully mobilized like this. Ships that hadn't left dry dock in decades were being rushed into service. Experimental weapons that had only existed on paper were being bolted onto hulls. Engineers worked around the clock to mount heavier guns, thicker armor, and more powerful engines. "Captain," her communications officer Dave Chen called from his station. "We're getting another transmission from the Federation survivors. They're sending us their tactical protocols and engagement rules." Bennett walked over to Chen's station and looked at the data scrolling across his screen. The Federation's rules of war were complex and elegant. Minimize casualties, preserve infrastructure, use the minimum force necessary to achieve objectives. It was warfare, as conducted by civilizations that had evolved past the need for total destruction. Admiral Thompson's voice crackled over the fleet communication system from his flagship. "I'm looking at these Federation protocols, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Very civilized, very restrained, very concerned with preserving enemy assets and minimizing collateral damage." There was a pause, and Bennett could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Standard protocols lost them 47 worlds. We do this the human way." Across the fleet, captains and crew members began to laugh. It wasn't cruel laughter, it was the dark humor of soldiers who knew they were about to do something terrible and necessary. The Federation had tried to fight the Harvesters like gentlemen. Humans were about to show them how barbarians fought. Captain Tom Rodriguez maneuvered his destroyer through the formation, checking the final preparations. His ship, the Vengeance, was typical of human military design, where Federation vessels were built for speed and efficiency. Human ships were built to take punishment and keep fighting. The Vengeance had survived 3 major battles during the Resource Wars, and her hull still bore the scars. Rodriguez looked at his crew as they ran through their pre-combat checks. These weren't academy graduates with perfect records and polished uniforms. They were mechanics and factory workers, miners from the asteroid belt, farmers' kids from the outer colonies, people who had grown up fixing broken machines with spare parts and determination. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "all weapons systems are green. We've got enough ammunition to fight for 6 months straight." "Good," Rodriguez replied, "because something tells me the harvesters don't surrender." The final ships arrived just as Earth's sun appeared around Jupiter's massive bulk. Transport vessels carrying supplies, ammunition, and spare parts. Hospital ships to treat the wounded. Even some of the older warships that had been retired after the last war, pulled out of mothballs and crewed by veterans who had answered the call to serve again. Admiral Thompson opened a fleet-wide channel from his command ship. Every captain, every crew member, every person in the massive armada could hear his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to jump into hyperspace and travel to the far side of the galaxy. We're going to fight an enemy that has destroyed worlds and killed billions of people. An enemy that reproduces faster than we can destroy it. That learns from every battle, that turns everything it touches into more weapons." He paused, letting that sink in. "The Federation asked for our help because they've run out of options. Their advanced technology failed. Their superior tactics failed. Their civilized approach to warfare failed. So they called the one species in the galaxy that everyone agrees is too violent, too primitive, and too stubborn to know when to quit." Bennett felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at the massive fleet around her. Every ship was loaded with enough firepower to crack a moon. Every crew member was ready to die fighting. This wasn't just a military operation. It was humanity's entire capacity for organized violence focused on a single target. "We're not going there to preserve resources or maintain tactical superiority," Thompson continued. "We're not going to worry about collateral damage or following proper protocols. We're going to find these metal parasites and kill every last one of them, even if we have to sacrifice every ship in this fleet to do it." The hyperspace generators began to charge, creating a low humming sound that vibrated through every hull. One by one, the ships of Earth's fleet began to disappear in flashes of twisted light as they jumped toward the Federation's last stronghold. "We're going to win," Thompson said simply, "because losing isn't an option." Bennett watched her home solar system disappear behind them as her ship entered hyperspace. Somewhere ahead lay the remnants of a galactic civilization that had called humanity for help. They were about to learn why Earth had never been conquered, why humans had survived every catastrophe their deadly planet could throw at them. They were about to learn what happened when you awakened the sleeping death world. The twisted light of hyperspace faded as the human fleet dropped back into normal space near Nexus Station. What they saw made even veteran soldiers curse under their breath. The Federation's last major stronghold was under attack by a swarm of mechanical nightmares that looked like giant metal spiders crossed with industrial mining equipment. Captain Lisa Bennett watched from her bridge as dozens of Harvester scouts swarmed around the massive space station. Each construct was the size of a city block, covered in cutting tools, drilling arms, and collection tubes that were already tearing chunks of metal from the station's outer hull. The aliens' defensive fleet was pulling back to what they called safe engagement range, several thousand kilometers away from the enemy. "Captain," her tactical officer called out, "the Federation ships are requesting we maintain minimum safe distance and coordinate our attack through their command structure." Bennett looked at the retreating alien vessels. Beautiful, sleek ships that looked more like art pieces than weapons of war. They moved in perfect formations, their hulls unmarked by battle damage, because they had spent 3 years running from fights they couldn't win. "Admiral Thompson," she called over the fleet to come, requesting permission to engage immediately. Thompson's voice came back instantly. Permission granted. All ships, weapons free. Show these machines what humans do to uninvited guests. The human fleet surged forward like a pack of hungry wolves, where the alien ships had retreated in orderly formations. The humans charged straight into the mechanical swarm with no regard for safe distances or proper tactics. Bennett's cruiser shook as she pushed the engines past their recommended limits. Racing toward the nearest cluster of harvester constructs, Captain Tom Rodriguez was the first to reach the enemy. His destroyer, the Vengeance, opened fire with every weapon it had while still accelerating. Plasma cannons, missile launchers, and kinetic railguns all fired at once, lighting up space with deadly energy. But the harvester construct adapted quickly, its armor plates shifting and changing to absorb the incoming fire. All ships, ramming speed, Rodriguez shouted over the communications channel. The Federation officers watching from their safe distance could only stare in horror as Rodriguez's destroyer smashed directly into the mechanical spider at full velocity. The impact tore both vessels apart, but the explosion took out 3 more harvester scouts that had been clustering around the destroyed construct. Insane, whispered Federation Admiral Zolfek from his command ship. Completely insane. They're destroying their own vessels. Admiral Thompson heard the comment over the open channel. Admiral Zolfek, you've been fighting these things for 3 years and lost 47 worlds. We've been fighting them for 30 minutes, and we're winning. Maybe insane is exactly what this situation calls for. The battle turned into something the Federation had never seen before. Human ships didn't just fire weapons at the harvesters, they rammed them, used their hulls as weapons, and employed tactics that would have been considered suicide by any civilized species. When their guns ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as guided missiles. When their engines were damaged, they used emergency thrusters to continue the attack. But the most shocking moment came when Colonel Amy Foster's marine transports approached a damaged harvester construct. Instead of destroying it from a safe distance, the humans actually docked with the mechanical nightmare, boarding parties away. Foster's voice crackled over the comm as her marines used explosive charges to blow holes in the harvester's hull. Men and women in heavy combat suits poured through the breaches. Carrying weapons and demolition charges, Admiral Zolthok couldn't believe what he was seeing. There, boarding the machines, those constructs are filled with toxic gases and radiation. The internal temperature is over 200 degrees. No organic life can survive in there. Thompson watched the tactical display as his marines fought their way through the mechanical corridors of the harvester construct. Humans evolved on a death world, Admiral. We're used to hostile environments. What you call impossible conditions, we call Tuesday. The Marines moved through the construct like they were clearing a building back on Earth. They used explosives to blow through reinforced barriers, portable shields to protect against the machine's defensive systems, and sheer determination to push deeper into the enemy vessel. Foster led from the front, her voice calm and professional as she directed her teams. Alpha Team, plant charges on what looks like the central processing unit. Bravo Team, secure the power core. Charlie Team, find anything that looks important, and blow it up. The construct tried to defend itself, sending repair drones and defensive systems against the human invaders. But the Marines had trained for urban warfare, tunnel fighting, and boarding actions in hostile environments. They adapted faster than the machine could respond. 20 minutes later, Foster's teams evacuated just before their charges detonated. The harvester construct tore itself apart from the inside, its death throes taking out 2 more enemy vessels that had been trying to assist it. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, the entire harvester scout force had been eliminated, but at a cost that shocked the Federation observers. Of the 50 human ships that had engaged the enemy, 12 had been completely destroyed, and another 20 were so heavily damaged they could barely maintain life support. But not one human vessel had retreated. Not one captain had pulled back to a safe distance. They had fought until the enemy was dead, or they were. Captain Bennett limped her battered cruiser toward Nexus Station's docking bays. Her hull was scarred with impact damage and plasma burns. Her port engine was completely gone, and half her crew was in the medical bay. But from somewhere in the ship, she could hear her surviving crew members singing old war songs from Earth's bloodiest conflicts. Admiral Zolthek met them at the docking bay, his aquatic form trembling with what Bennett realized was fear. Not fear of the harvesters, but fear of the humans who had just saved his people. "Your species," he said quietly, "fights like demons." Bennett looked at her damaged ship, at her wounded crew, at the debris field where 12 human vessels had died, to save people they had never met. "Admiral," she said, "we haven't even gotten started yet." The aliens were beginning to understand. They hadn't just called for help. They had summoned something from the dark corners of the galaxy that was more terrifying than their mechanical enemies. They had awakened humanity. The warning sirens throughout Nexus Station had been blaring for 6 hours straight. Long-range sensors painted a terrifying picture on every display screen, a wall of mechanical death, stretching across space like a metal hurricane. The main harvester fleet was approaching, and at its center lurked something that made even hardened veterans stop and stare in disbelief. The primary construct was the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with millions of smaller mechanical units. Weapon ports opened and closed, like breathing mouths. Construction bays extended from its sides, already building new harvester units as it traveled. This wasn't just a warship, it was a mobile factory, a planet killer, and the central brain of the entire harvester network rolled into one nightmare. Captain Lisa Bennett stood in the station's command center alongside Federation officers who looked like they had already given up hope. Admiral Zolthek's tentacles drooped with exhaustion as he coordinated the evacuation of civilian transports. The other alien species representatives spoke in hushed whispers about which systems they might flee to next. Estimated time to contact: 14 hours, reported a Federation sensor operator. Recommended course of action: immediate evacuation of all personnel and military assets. That's when Admiral Thompson's voice cut through the despair like a blade. "We're implementing Operation Tombstone." The alien officers looked confused, but every human in the room went silent. They knew that name from the classified briefings back on Earth. It was the plan nobody wanted to use. The strategy that had been designed for the absolute worst-case scenario. When conventional warfare had completely failed, Captain Rodriguez, his face still bearing fresh scars from the previous battle, studied the tactical display, showing the approaching harvester armada. Even with his experience in the resource wars, the numbers were staggering. The enemy fleet contained thousands of constructs, each one larger than the biggest human battleship. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "that's a suicide mission. We'll lose half the fleet, maybe more." Thompson didn't hesitate for even a second. "Then we'll win with the other half." The plan was insane by any reasonable standard. While the main human fleet engaged the harvester swarm in direct combat, volunteer ships would punch through the enemy lines and deliver boarding parties directly to the primary construct. Those Marines would fight their way to the central core and plant nuclear charges, powerful enough to tear the massive vessel apart from the inside. Everyone knew it was a one-way trip. The volunteer ships would have to get close enough to dock with the construct, meaning they would be surrounded by thousands of enemy units with no hope of escape. The Marines going inside would be walking into a radioactive hell filled with toxic gases, crushing gravity, and defensive systems designed to kill anything organic. When Thompson asked for volunteers, every single human captain raised their hand. Immediately. Federation Counselor Rihanna, a graceful being whose species had evolved from flying creatures, watched in amazement as the human officers calmly discussed who would get the honor of dying first. There was no arguing, no hesitation, no pleas for alternative strategies. They were planning their own deaths with the same professional attitude they used for routine patrol missions. "I don't understand," she whispered to Captain Bennett. "Why are they celebrating? They know they're going to die." Bennett was checking her sidearm, a brutal-looking weapon that would have been considered a war crime by Federation standards. Around them, human crew members were loading equipment, saying goodbye to friends, and making jokes about what they might find inside an alien machine. "Because we're about to do something impossible," Bennett replied, "and humans love proving everyone wrong." Colonel Amy Foster gathered her Marine volunteers in the transport bay. These weren't fresh recruits or glory seekers. They were experienced soldiers who had survived the worst conflicts Earth had to offer. Men and women who had fought in the tunnels under Neo-Tokyo, in the poisoned swamps of Venus, and in the zero-gravity battles around the outer planets. They were laughing. "Okay, people?" Foster called out, her voice carrying over the sound of weapons being loaded and armor being sealed. "We're about to board a construct that's part nuclear reactor, part computer brain, and part death trap. The radiation alone should kill us in minutes. The temperature will cook us in our suits. And there are probably millions of defense drones waiting to turn us into hamburger." One of her sergeants raised his hand. "Colonel, you forgot to mention the part where we have to fight our way out afterward." Foster grinned. "Sergeant, we're not fighting our way out. We're setting off nuclear charges inside that thing. The plan is to die spectacularly." The Marines cheered. Admiral Zolthik couldn't process what he was witnessing. In 3 years of fighting the Harvesters, he had never seen anyone volunteer for certain death, let alone treat it like a celebration. The Federation's military doctrine emphasized preservation of personnel, strategic withdrawal when necessary, and accepting defeat when victory was impossible. But humans seemed to operate by completely different rules. They didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't surrender when victory was impossible. They just found new and creative ways to hurt their enemies, even if it meant dying in the process. The assault began 12 hours later. The main human fleet charged straight into the Harvester swarm, drawing fire from thousands of enemy constructs. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes as they were torn apart by mechanical claws and energy weapons. But for every human vessel that died, they took multiple Harvesters with them. In the chaos of battle, Foster's transport ships punched through the enemy lines. The volunteer vessels were already burning, their hulls torn open by enemy fire, but they kept flying. They reached the primary construct and used magnetic clamps and explosive charges to attach themselves to its surface. The Marines poured into the mechanical nightmare, fighting through corridors filled with poison gas and defensive robots. Foster led from the front, her voice calm and professional, even as her suit's radiation detectors screamed warnings. "Alpha Team, secure the power distribution center. Bravo Team, find the central processing core. Charlie Team, plant charges on anything that looks important." They fought for 2 hours inside the construct, pushing deeper into its mechanical heart, while their comrades died around them. The nuclear charges were planted exactly where they needed to be, deep in the construct's core, where the explosion would tear it apart completely. Foster activated the timer with 30 seconds left on her suit's life support. As the charges detonated, the primary construct exploded in a ball of nuclear fire visible from 3 star systems away. 17 human ships had been lost in the assault, taking their crews with them into the void. But as the mechanical debris rained across space and the surviving Harvester units fell into chaos without their central command, Admiral Thompson knew they had won more than just a battle. They had shown the galaxy that some species don't know how to quit. The darkness of space tore open like a wound as something impossible emerged from the void between stars. The final Harvester mothership materialized in a flash of twisted energy, and every sensor in the Nexus system screamed warnings that made no sense. The construct wasn't just larger than most moons, it was actively growing. its surface crawling with construction bays that built new mechanical units every few seconds. Captain Lisa Bennett stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display with the detached calm of someone who had already accepted death. Her cruiser had been patched together with spare parts and determination, held together by welds and prayers. Around her, the remaining human fleet looked like a collection of scrap metal floating in space. Burned hulls, missing weapon systems, crews running on stimulants, and sheer stubbornness. The Federation survivors had gathered their ships around Nexus Station like frightened children hiding behind their parents. Beautiful vessels that had once been the pride of galactic civilization now hung powerless in space, their crews preparing for evacuation rather than battle. Admiral Bennett reported over the fleet communication system. All remaining human forces are in position. We count 43 operational vessels, though I use the term operational loosely. Admiral Thompson's voice crackled back from his flagship, the hull of which was so damaged that entire sections were open to vacuum. Half his bridge crew was working in emergency suits because life support had failed 3 battles ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Thompson announced to the entire fleet, today we finish this. Earth Command has authorized the use of kinetic planetoids. Operation Sledgehammer is now active. Even the human crews went silent at that announcement. Operation Sledgehammer was the ultimate weapon in humanity's arsenal. A project so expensive and time-consuming that it had taken 50 years to complete. Every human colony, every mining operation, every military installation had contributed resources to create weapons that defied imagination. The space around Nexus Station suddenly filled with new contacts as massive objects dropped out of hyperspace. Asteroids the size of cities, their surfaces covered with fusion engines and guidance computers. Small moons that had been hollowed out and converted into kinetic projectiles. Even a few dead planets that human engineers had turned into guided missiles capable of cracking continents. Federation Counselor Rayana watched from the observation deck of Nexus Station as humanity prepared to throw rocks at their enemies. But these weren't ordinary rocks. They were mountain-sized bullets traveling at significant fractions of light speed, each one carrying more destructive force than entire Federation fleets. Impossible, whispered Admiral Zolthok. The engineering requirements alone. The energy costs. How long have humans been preparing for this war? About 50,000 years, Thompson replied over the open channel. Ever since the first human picked up a rock and threw it at something bigger than himself. The Harvester mothership began, launching its own forces, waves of mechanical constructs that poured from its surface like metallic locusts. Millions of them, each one the size of a building, moving in perfect coordination toward the human fleet. The mechanical swarm was so dense it actually blocked out the light from nearby stars. The human fleet charged forward to meet them. What followed wasn't a battle by any civilized definition. It was mutual annihilation carried out with the brutal efficiency of a slaughterhouse. Human ships rammed enemy constructs at full speed, using their hulls as weapons when their guns ran dry. Crews manually detonated their reactors when their vessels were too damaged to fight, taking clusters of enemies with them into nuclear oblivion. Captain Rodriguez's destroyer, somehow still flying despite missing most of its armor plating, drove straight into the heart of a harvester formation. His final transmission was typically human. Tell my wife I kept my promise. I took more of them with me than they got of me. The Vengeance exploded in a brilliant flash that temporarily outshone the system's star, its destruction taking out 3 entire enemy formations in a chain reaction of devastation. Meanwhile, the kinetic projectiles accelerated toward their target. The smaller asteroids struck first, their impacts sending shockwaves through the mothership's structure. Then came the weaponized moons, hitting with forces that registered on gravitational sensors across multiple star systems. Colonel Foster and her Marines were still fighting inside a harvester construct when the final kinetic weapons struck. They had been trapped there for 6 hours, holding a critical position, while Federation evacuation ships escaped to safety. As their nuclear charges detonated and the construct died around them, Foster's last words were recorded by her suit's communication system: "Mission accomplished. Semper Fi." The mothership tried to adapt, tried to absorb the kinetic impacts and convert the incoming projectiles into more construction material. But humans had planned for that. The final projectile was a weaponized asteroid filled with antimatter. Moorheads, a doomsday weapon that had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. When it struck, the explosion tore reality itself. The mothership, a construct that had devoured 47 worlds and killed billions of beings, was ripped apart from the inside out. Its death throes lit up the entire system as debris the size of continents flew in all directions. The surviving Harvester forces, suddenly cut off from their central command, fell into chaos. Some tried to continue fighting, others attempted to rebuild their command structure, but most simply shut down as their network collapsed. The few that remained functional retreated into the darkness between stars, fleeing from a species that had proven to be more terrifying than their mechanical perfection. In the aftermath, as Federation ships emerged from behind Nexus Station's shields, the scope of human sacrifice became clear. Of the 300 vessels that had answered Earth's call to war, fewer than 30 remained operational. Thousands of human beings had died in the largest military operation in their species. History. Counselor Rayana found Admiral Thompson on the bridge of his crippled flagship, staring out at the debris field where so many of his people had died. His ship was held together by emergency patches and determination, but somehow it was still flying. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did your species sacrifice so much for strangers? We had dismissed you as primitive. We had refused you membership in our civilization. We called you barbarians and warmongers. Why did you come when we called for help?" Thompson was quiet for a long moment, watching as Federation rescue ships began the long process of recovering human survivors from the wreckage of the battle. In the distance, the scattered remains of the Harvester mothership continued to burn, lighting up space with the fires of humanity's victory. "Because you called for help," he said quietly, "and humans don't leave anyone behind. It doesn't matter if you're family, friends, or complete strangers. When someone needs help, we show up. When someone can't defend themselves, we stand between them and whatever's trying to hurt them." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that she finally understood. It wasn't hatred or anger or the mindless violence that her species had always attributed to humans. It was something far more dangerous. It was love. Love for people they had never met. Love for civilizations that had rejected them. Love for the idea that no one should have to face the darkness alone. "Your people spent 3 years running from the Harvesters," Thompson continued. "That's the civilized thing to do when faced with superior force. But humans aren't civilized, Counselor. We're the species that looked at a galaxy full of things trying to kill us, and decided to kill them right back. The galaxy had learned something that day. When the darkness comes, when the monsters emerge from the void, when all hope seems lost, and the civilized species prepare for extinction, sometimes you need to call the barbarians. Sometimes you need to wake up the Deathworlders. Sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters, and humanity, for all its flaws and violence and stubborn refusal to quit, would always answer that call, because that's what humans do.